Oh, sir, we're waiting on Destiny to join.
But you can't go ahead without destiny.
Okay, okay, sir. Okay, good morning, everyone. So, Group 3 will be looking on recession in the Caribbean. Our group members are Asha Gordon, Kanila Hunter, Destiny Johnson, and Jody Thompson McLeod. So, what is a recession? A recession is a significant decline in economic activity that lasts for months over or even years. Experts declare a recession when a nation's economy experiences negative gross domestic product (GDP), rising levels of unemployment, failing retail sales, and contracting measures of income and manufacturing for an extended period of time. Recessions are considered an unavoidable part of the business cycle or the regular cadence of expansion and contraction that occurs in a nation's economy. Four causes of recession in the Caribbean. The first one is high interest rates. Interest rates are a key link in the economy between investors and savers and finance and real economic activity. When interest rates rise, it limits liquidity, cash to be invested, which causes an issue in assisting economy well-being. The second cause is a stock market crash. The sudden loss of confidence in investing can create a bear market. Stock prices fall by a large gap and continually decline, draining capital out of businesses. Next one is deflation. Deflation reduces the value of goods and services being sold on the market that encourages people to wait to buy until prices are lower. The next one is inflation. Inflation increases the value of goods and services being sold on the market. That encourages people to buy less of these items until the prices fall. Okay, now we're going to look on the effects of global recession in the Caribbean. So the first one is unemployment. A fall in the economic output will cause a rise in unemployment. This is because some firms will go bankrupt, meaning workers will lose their jobs. They will lay off workers and try to reduce costs and will cut back on the hiring new workers. The unemployment figures may underestimate the true value of unemployment. The Caribbean depends a lot of exports, and with a global recession, there will be less exports for foreign countries, which, as stated, will lead to numerous persons being without a job.
Suffering stock market. Investment suffers. The industrial production is badly affected as investors avoid investing in companies that might suffer losses during the recession. Bigger companies are able to withstand the setbacks, but smaller companies have a tough time and some may end up closing down. As an example, the Jamaica Stock Exchange, JSE, is a leading stock market in the world, and if a global recession took place, numerous companies would lose local and international investors. Market decline. Goods and services have a hard time being sold because the public lose their purchasing power. This power is simply the amount of goods or services that are able to be purchased. Due to a global recession, consumers would have a difficult time being able to afford these things, maybe due to the fact that prices might increase to try and make up for the recession's effects. In Caribbean countries, where the dollar values are a bit lower than elsewhere, market decline would be a larger issue than in other places. Higher government borrowing. This is the money that the government borrows to spend on public services such as tax cuts, new defense spending, and reforms of the health system. With the government borrowing more, lower national savings and income would result. A higher percentage of the savings available for investments would go to the government securities. This, in turn, would decrease the amount invested in private ventures such as factories and computers, making the workforce less productive.
The fifth negative effect is lack of business opportunities. Entrepreneurs may have a lack of funds available for borrowing or starting new companies during a recession. Innovation often comes from the small business segment, but a lack of funding, coupled with a downturn in spending, may make small business owners unwilling to take big risks. Now we're looking at the ways to recover from the effects of global recession. The first way is to implement lower interest rates to increase borrowing from financial institutions, which will result in an increase in money supply so that aggregate demand increases. Consumers can have money to spend on goods and services, and firms will increase output. The firms will have to employ more labor, thus reducing unemployment and output and income in the Caribbean will rise. The second way is to increase government spending on poverty reduction, thus creating multiplier effect and reducing extreme poverty. Multiplier effect is when an increase in spending produces an increase in national income and consumption greater than the initial amount spent.
Okay, the third way, devaluation, decline in value of the currency of a country. This makes imports expensive, so locals are forced to do without or buy substitutes or local alternatives. As a result, exports are cheaper for foreign countries to buy. This reduces the outflow of money and increases the inflow of money in a country. Number four, decreasing income, goods, services, and corporation taxes will encourage consumers to spend more and firms to invest more. And the fifth and final, protect local industry with a buy local campaign and increase funding for small businesses. This will increase the demand. Asha? This will increase the demand for local products. This is the end of our presentation.
All right, thank you very much. Don't end the sharing. All right, so go back to the effects of recession. So ladies, one thing that we need to draw from this presentation is that recession is a decline in the economic activity in a country. We could say what is going on now in the world is a recession. Well, we could say basically when it comes to COVID, if we look at it, we have never seen this level yet, where the entire world basically come to an halt. But at the end of the day, recession is a serious phenomenon that affects Caribbean countries, where the economic activities in our country has always declined over a period of time. It's just like in the Bible where I think it was Joseph who had a dream about 7 years of famine and 7 years of prosperity. I think something like that, where they had to prepare for the time of famine. While Joseph was, I believe he was enslaved in Egypt during the time. It's the same thing with the world today. There are times when the world is economic activities in the world is constantly booming, always have this buzz about in terms of economic activities. But there are times when the world and the Caribbean declines, the economic activities decline, and that has some very serious impact on Caribbean countries. Now, one of the point that the group mentioned is unemployment, which is true, because if there's less economic activities, there's less money to borrow, then one thing for sure is that you're going to have high unemployment. And we have seen this in Jamaica in 2010 when we had a recession. 2008, 2010, we had a recession. The numbers of Jamaicans that were unemployed were over 100,000, right? And right now, in COVID, during COVID, I believe the numbers are similar. There's a lot of people who are out of job. The economic problems that we're facing now is due to a pandemic, but there are other times where where the individual Caribbean countries face recession because of mismanagement of the country's money. All right, go to the last slide on devaluation. You have a slide on devaluation. Yes. So when you go to the IMF, one way in which Caribbean countries attempt to recover from recession is that they have less money they have less foreign currency, right? So there's either a decline in tourism, a decline in their mining sector, a decline in the oil field, a decline in agriculture. So everything is declining. And so they have no access to foreign currency, right? And if you don't have access to foreign currency or your foreign reserve, these are the amount of US dollars that a country has to buy goods and services, because you can't buy goods and services in Jamaican dollar, Barbadian dollar, Trinidadian dollar. You have to buy it in US. The world economy is linked to the US dollar. And if you are not able to buy, if you don't have enough US and you devalue the currency, if you devalue your currency to increase export, as the students here mention, it makes goods that is coming into the country, that is your import, very expensive. And remember, devaluation will have a very negative effect on a lot of us, because a lot of homes now in Jamaica, there are people paying rent in US dollars. There are a lot of loans in US dollars. There are a lot of investment funds in US dollars. Almost every single food that we have, we buy it from abroad in US dollars, right? You hear in Parliament this week last week, last week and this week, where they're talking about the increase in terms of the price of goods. And so devaluation is going to have a serious effect on the society. So when you look at the effects of recession on the Caribbean, you could also look at unemployment. You look at unemployment, but you could also look at increased poverty in the society. Increased poverty is also a negative effect of recession. Another effect of recession is that if the country has little or no money, then the government is going to spend less money on health And we can see that in Jamaica today, where we don't have enough bed spaces for people who are sick. We don't have any oxygen in the hospital. So pray to God we are not sick, because there's no oxygen, no bed spaces. One person mentioned the other day that the X-ray machine is out, so you can't do X-ray. Surgeries are canceled, and so less money is there to pump into health. So another negative effect of recession is the decline in the health condition or the quality of health services in a country. Another one that you can look at is education. So when you have a recession, economic activity, the government will give less money to the country in terms of education, in funding the education budget. So schools will have is less money going to the schools to pay teachers, less money going to the schools to repair furniture, less money going to the school to buy papers, inks to print, right? Just the overall running of the schools in the country, public schools, will decline during a recession. And usually, during a recession, the group that face the blunt of the economic burden during a recession is the females in the society, the domestic workers, the females who are single mothers, the market vendors, the female market vendors, because they carry the blunt of the economic burden in a society, the females. And so there are several studies that were done. One was by Antrobus, who looked at how recessionary activities in Jamaica during the 1970s and 80s, how that would have affected the Caribbean countries. Now, one way in which Caribbean countries tried to get themselves out of recession is through the IMF. Always remember that. So all the points are correct. I'm just adding to your points, ladies. And if you look at all of the different ways in which you mentioned here about the recovery from a recession, these are all of the different conditionalities that the IMF prescribed for a country to recover. Because they go to the IMF because they want to borrow money. So I think go to the first one, ways to recover, number one. Group 3, number one. All right, no. 2, go to the next one. Next. All right, I'm not seeing that point. All right, so the point I'm trying to make is that one way in which the IMF, one of the prescription of the IMF is for the country to cut workers. So the government to cut workers. In the Caribbean, the governments of the Caribbean are one of the largest employers of its people. It's not like the United States where most of the people are employed by private sector. Here in the Caribbean, most of us either in the informal sector, we have a government job. And one of the prescription by the IMF is to reduce spending. And by reduce spending, the IMF has prescribed over the years to remove the IMF has prescribed over the years to remove the level of expenditure when it comes to salaries. So the government must try to ensure that the salaries at uh, a set amount to the GDP. So in Jamaica, I think it was agreed, is that 9% of our GDP the government should have when it comes to salaries. That can have serious impact because that means you're going to employ less teachers, less nurses, less doctors, less police officers, less everything, right? And that can have some very serious problem on the society. So I'm encouraging you, please, to read up on recession and also to answer the question, because this is another question that we could see on the exam. Group 4, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Group 3.
Good morning, everyone. We will be presenting on development, and this presentation will be done by Kristen Elliott, Jamila Fletcher, Deidre Jackson, Toriana O'Connor, and Jada Watson. So, the moat that we received was economic growth. Economic growth does not necessarily reflect development, and we agree. Right. What is development? So, according to Cambridge.org, development is the process in which someone or something grows or changes and becomes more advanced. Kristen will now take the next slide.
So what are indicators of development exactly? The term indicators of development is used to describe measures that can be used to evaluate the level of the quality of life in a given territory. Although there are economic indicators, they are not the most crucial in determining the true living standards of citizens within a country. The non-economic factors we chose to represent development are levels of education, employment rates, healthcare, equality, and pollution.
Okay, so levels of education. So the point is the analysis of education as a social indicator is important as it correlates with literacy rates and job opportunities. So the evidence of this would be that the Jamaica Information Service estimated adult literacy to 87% in 2020. This, however, omits that academic success in schooling higher than tertiary education, that is, higher than secondary education, that is, tertiary education has been lacking as tuitions are becoming more unaffordable. This is a stark contrast to Barbados and Cuba, who provide their citizens with free education, having national literacy rates as high as 99.6% and 96% respectively. This indicates an advanced and organized educational system, where fundings and efforts are made by the government to ensure development. Explanation. Education aids in the facilitation of literacy, which is simply a person's ability to read and write. Literacy rates reflects a person's educational attainment, which determines their qualifications for jobs after secondary and tertiary schooling. The larger the literate working class, the greater the chances a country will be developed. This may be reflected in advancements in technology to aid in the trade and manufacturing industries. However, when literacy rates are low, that is high illiteracy, a country is likely to have a high number of impoverished states filled with high school dropouts. Oftentimes, tertiary level education is not pursued due to the lack of funds as it is oftentimes costly. In Jamaica, there is a relatively high number of individuals who do not pay taxes as they are not employed. This is as a result of lack of educational qualifications. Explanation continues. Additionally, there is little funding placed in educational system across the island. This results in high levels of illiteracy due to the low numbers of participation in secondary and tertiary schooling. In Cuba, however, the educational system is a direct correlation to its political system, as education is free throughout secondary and tertiary schooling. Furthermore, funding towards the educational system amounts to about 13% of Cuba's GDP, which is relatively high when compared to Jamaica. The link: education is an important factor to consider in a country's development, as it provides the literate body which advances a country not only socially but economically.
Employment rates. So the point is, employment rate is an important indicator of development as it relates to the levels of poverty and crime in a society. Evidence. The employment rate in a country reflects how productive a country is, both economically and socially. Employment ensures that members of a society are able to achieve their material goals. Employment is necessary for allowing technological advancements to occur as the workplace constantly needs to adapt. Poverty and crime rates reflect a nation's level of development. Unemployment causes poverty and crime levels to rise. According to the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, Statin, they reported a 10.8% reduction in the number of employed persons as of July 2020, and that is a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Individuals who are laid off have no source of income because they've become susceptible to the issue of poverty. This inhibits development. Youth unemployment is a serious issue. Young people struggling with the lack of economic opportunities turn to illegal activities, and crime further depresses growth. And this is from the IMF in relation to Jamaica. Explanation. Although employment levels are connected to economic concepts such as productivity, there are also social implications of a society's high unemployment rate. Notably, poverty and crime stem from unemployment. In relation to poverty, when large percentages of persons are unable to gain wealth and live a quality of life, this signifies that the country's standard of living is low. A low standard of living, meaning inadequate access to education or reliable healthcare or quality housing, stalls a country's ability to develop. Additionally, there is a correlation between not having a job and crime rates. Robert Merton, a sociologist, explains this, that when individuals are unable to access their goals by standard societal means, they will turn to more deviant acts to gain their desires. Unlike strictly economic indicators, employment is better able to reveal the conditions of an individual's life in a society, therefore showing human development. Link. It is clear to see that employment is an important indicator of development. It is crucial in combating social development issues such as crime and poverty, as well as to approximate the amount of persons who may or may not be enjoying a good standard of living.
Okay, so our next indicator is healthcare. So the point is, access to good healthcare is also an important indicator of development. Evidence of this: access to healthcare in rural Jamaica is different from that of the urban area. Jamaica's healthcare sector is characterized by lack of equipment and human resource, especially in the rural areas. All these factors influence the quality of healthcare available to Jamaican citizens. Now, people have died in Jamaican hospitals due to negligence and lack of medical equipment. Recently, a 17-year-old girl died due to lack of medical attention, even though she was brought to the hospital. Jamaican hospitals have been under more stress since the increase in number of COVID-19 cases. The hospitals have insufficient space and equipment to accommodate these patients, and this was even before the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, in addition to this, people travel from rural areas to seek healthcare because the rural hospitals lack even more resources than the urban ones. Explanation. Economic growth does not necessarily reflect development, as development is more than just a numerical value. If people are unable to receive proper health care when ill, then they are more likely to suffer for a period of time or even die. Additionally, when urban hospitals are put under strain, then less effective care is given to each patient. This then affects the level of productivity of a country, as less persons are able to work effectively within the labor force. Link. If the people of a country are unable to access good health care, then they are susceptible to health complications. An unhealthy population means that less people are able to conduct effective activities within the labor force.
Pollution. The point is that proper management, maintenance, and preservation of natural resources such as land, sea, and air, as well as protection of natural habitats such as wetlands, coral reefs, and woodlands is an indicator of sustainable development. The evidence for this is that Haiti is the poorest and most underdeveloped country in the Western Hemisphere and the Caribbean region. Although the island is prone to natural disasters such as hurricanes and earthquakes, environmental challenges such as deforestation, water pollution, air pollution, and poor waste management, along with poor agricultural practices, have contributed significantly to the island's current state of pollution. Meanwhile, Trinidad and Tobago, which relied heavily on environmentally harmful means such as mining and deforestation for economic gain, has now shifted towards more sustainable environmental practices. The government in Trinidad has pledged to reduce the output of harmful greenhouse gases and adhere to suitable waste management practices. With millions of people in Haiti subsisting below the poverty line, activities which degrade the environment, such as deforestation and mining, are the means by which these people are able to sustain themselves and their families. Haitians mostly farm for economic gain. However, in order for the land to be viable for farming, an extensive amount of land is cleared. When the trees are removed, this leads to soil erosion as there is nothing there to hold the soil together. Also, heavy-duty machinery is not available to clear the land, so they practice slash and burn because it is cheaper and easier. This practice contributes to air pollution as there is an increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Likewise, their farming practices contribute to water pollution as the fungicides and pesticides end up in the groundwater and harm aquatic animals. These activities contribute to the stagnation of the development of the Haitian society. And the link is that the ability of a country to sustain the natural environment with minimal damage signifies sustainable development, which is more beneficial than economic development that would lead to depletion of natural resources and pollution.
And our last non-economic indicator is equality. So the point is that equality is also an important measure or indicator of societal development. Evidence: to the economically adept thinker, one would say that Saudi Arabia and Trinidad are far more developed than Jamaica. However, due to gender and racial tensions in the countries respectively, meaning that Saudi Arabia has gender tensions and Trinidad has racial tensions, Jamaica can be seen as more developed as these problems are absent from the Jamaican society. In Saudi Arabia, women are denied basic rights and are often abused because of the religion of the state and the dominance of the patriarchy in the society. In Trinidad, the political parties are based on one's ethnicity, with one representing the blacks and the other the Indians. Jamaica does not have racial or gender-based tensions. Explanation. Equality is very important in assessing the level of development a country enjoys. This is as a country can develop economically, but the citizens are abused and unhappy. So we can see that clearly, for example, during the period of slavery. So we know that a lot of Caribbean societies were very prosperous during enslavement, but the people were basically facing inhumane conditions and dying in large numbers, which is not something that should be, which is just an example of why economic indicators should not be the be all and end all of what determines economic development and growth. So here, one cannot overlook the importance of societal stability in development. Also, inequality is seen as a traditional or underdeveloped way of thinking, and so these countries that have these traditional views may be labeled as underdeveloped despite their economic success. Link. Even though countries like Saudi Arabia and Trinidad are seen as economically more developed than Jamaica, the social issues of gender-based and racial tensions make them less developed as a society than Jamaica. So you made it to the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening. And this is
Thank you very much, Group 4. The last, I'm going to touch on a few a few things that you mentioned, but in regards to the last point about Trinidad and Saudi Arabia, talking about using the point of inequality in the society. I think that was I understand what you're saying, but I think it was a weak point, weak way in which how it was developed, and weak in the explanation, well, the examples, weak examples and weak explanation. Reason being that Jamaica has racial tension, maybe not at the level that we're seeing in Trinidad, where there's the politics is divided when in terms of Indians and Africans, right? But there's racial tensions here. You have a large section of near blacks in the society who have been, we call it now, have little or no access to certain things in the society because of their either social background or because of the color of their skin. We see it in the banks during the 1960s, 40s, 50s, 60s, early 70s. In the Jamaican society, we also see it in the hotel industry today, where whites are people who what we call white Jamaican, but they're really mixed, have their, they are given a certain level of preference. If we look at the Carlstone study on the social stratification in Jamaica, majority of the persons who are at the apex of the Jamaican society are people of a particular skin complexion. So Jamaica has inequality in terms of racial discrimination and color discrimination. And in addition to that, when it comes to inequality in Jamaica, there's a lot of abuse when it comes to females here in Jamaica. Maybe not at the same level of Saudi Arabia, where females are not allowed to drive cars, but females, in terms of inequality, are paid way less for the same amount of job, well, the same level of job as a male in the banks, So if you should have, for example, a female who is a bank manager and a male who is given the same position, both of them doing the same job, because she's a female, she's paid less, way less than the male. And that is something that is very, very prevalent in Jamaica. So there's inequality when it comes to women. And also when Barack Obama gave his last speech, that speech was in January. I can't remember the name of the speech in January. Every January they give this big address to the different houses of representatives there in the US. He mentioned that Jamaica has one of the highest rate of inequalities in the world. Highest rate of inequality in the world. And so how we look at inequalities, not just through race and through how females have access, but inequality between social groups. Jamaica is a very, very classist society. The classism in Jamaica is terrible. You have one set of, and I don't have a problem with anyone because of their class, and I'm not, and it's no envy of anyone because of their class, but the classism in Jamaica stifles development because just one group of people in the society controls the wealth. One group of people in the society control all the resources in the country. One group of people own all the banks. One group of people own all the supermarkets. One group of people own everything. And so there are little or no access to the wealth, or what we call the economic pie of the country, by the 90 or the 98%. The middle class might get a little stuff from it, but in fact, the level of inequality is very high. In fact, a friend of mine said once that in Jamaica, if you are rich, you are very, very rich, but if you are poor, you are dirt poor. So you have a lot of very nice apartments in Kingston going up all over the country, but most of the citizens are not able to access funding for those apartments. Entire communities, through government policies and the private sector, have cut off a lot of poor Jamaicans from accessing certain things. And Barack Obama would have mentioned about the inequality in Jamaica, that it's one of the highest in the world. And he said to the US, the citizens in the US, that he feared that the US was getting to that level where most of the people in most of the citizens in the US wouldn't have access to certain things in the future. Because America is seen as the place of the dream, American dream, where everybody have equal access and equal opportunities, and everybody can be rich. There's not equal opportunities here in Jamaica, and there's not equal access to things here. And so the inequality in this country is terrible. So what you could use for that point is to discuss, instead of mentioning about Trinidad and Saudi Arabia, you could use the inequalities in Jamaica between those who are downtown and uptown, right? To talk about or to show that there's inequalities in a society and how inequality stifles development in a country. But the other points are very good points, I must say, but I disagree with that last point about inequality, because when we look at social justice in when we look at the theme of social justice, we are going to look at some of those inequalities in the society. We're not even touched on sexual inequality, where people are discriminated in the society based on their sexual orientation. People are discriminated based on their class. So classism, where some in most communities in this country, which is the majority of the country, people have to change their address when they're applying for jobs in a country. So there's a lot of issues here, a lot of issues when it comes to inequalities. So just fix up that last point, because if you write that in the exam and somebody see it, they're going, I don't know how the examiner would take that point, especially when it comes to seeing that Jamaica has a deep inequality, and it's nothing new, because one scholar would have written a book about the two Jamaicas. One Jamaica is very, very different from the other Jamaica. The Jamaica that I live in might not be the Jamaica that you live in. Very, very, very terrible situation when it comes to inequality here. So, ladies, thank you very much for group 3 and 4 for your presentations, very informative presentations. I will send a document, a folder, so you could upload the presentation so the other class members can have access to the presentations. When we meet on Monday, we're going to do group 5 and 6, and then we are going to wrap up development. So for the first 30 minutes, group 5 and 6 will present, and the next 30 minutes, I will just give my few little comments on development, look at the indicators of development, and once we are through with the indicators of development, then we move on next, when we return from the break, to look at globalization. All right, ladies, thank you very much for participating in the class through the presentation.
Bye,
Bye,
sir.
sir.
Bye, sir.
Bye, sir.
Bye-bye.
Sir.
Go ahead for me.